The dry wind carried a scream across the canyon before the sun had even kissed the horizon. Maris O'Connell froze, her heart hammering in her chest as the echo twisted around the jagged cliffs like a living thing. She was 30, yet the raw. Fear in her chest made her feel like the frightened child she had once been, hiding behind her mother's skirts. The prairie stretched endlessly, golden waves of grass whispering secrets she could not decipher. Somewhere in the distance, the faint glint of a horse's silhouette slid across the dust, a lone figure, dark and purposeful, moving as though it belonged to the land itself. Maris clutched the satchel at her side, the only token of her late father's care, and in that moment she realized the sisters she had promised to protect had unknowingly walked straight into danger. Her younger sister, Lila, had insisted on wandering ahead to collect wild herbs, blissfully unaware of the band of rustlers that had made this canyon their hunting ground. The older sister, Sage, kept close, her eyes scanning the horizon, but even she could not sense the danger lurking beyond the next ridge. The Apache had lived in silence for years, haunted by the ghosts of his past, avoiding towns, avoiding people, avoiding life itself. His name was Kael, though few dared speak it aloud. Rumors in the distant settlements whispered of his ferocity, a warrior who had survived when no one else could. His dark, copper-toned skin blended with the shadows of the canyons, his long, black hair tangled with strands of feathers and beads, tribal jewelry clinking softly with each precise movement. To the untrained eye, he was part of the land, a myth sliding across the plains. But today, Kael felt the shift in the wind. He smelled it first, a scent of fear and desperation that was not native to the prairie. A scent carried by Maris and her sisters as they navigated the narrow canyon path. His amber eyes narrowed. He had chosen isolation for the quiet it brought, a sanctuary from men who had hunted him for sins he did not commit. And yet fate had its own plan. Maris felt a prickle at the back of her neck, a warning she could not ignore. She whispered, "Sage, stay close." The words barely left her lips when a rustling in the grass caught her attention. Her breath hitched, and she could feel Lila stiffen beside her, sensing the same disturbance. Maris had faced hardship. Before the droughts, the loneliness after their parents' deaths, the harsh whispers of the townfolk, but nothing had prepared her for the uncanny stillness settling over the canyon like a living shadow. Then she saw him. Kael emerged from behind a rock, massive and unyielding as the land itself. His presence was commanding, yet not a word escaped his lips. The sisters froze, unsure whether this apparition would bring salvation or doom. Dust clung to his bare, muscular arms, and the sunlight reflected off the intricate patterns of his tribal jewelry, flickering like flames dancing in a hearth. Kael's gaze swept the sisters once, taking in their confusion, their fear, their determination. He did not speak, for words were unnecessary. His silent appraisal said everything. These were not careless travelers. They were survivors, but naive to the dangers of a land that could turn on them without notice. He took a deliberate step forward, and the grass underfoot bent, whispering their arrival to the wind. Maris swallowed hard, trying to force courage into her voice. Who are you?" she asked, though part of her feared any answer. Kael's eyes did not shift. They remained steady, unwavering, as if reading their souls rather than their words. And in that instant, Maris realized that the legend was real. The warrior of the canyons, the ghost of the Apache, had stepped into their lives. And the sisters' journey, one meant to be simple and safe, had already taken a perilous turn. Above them, the canyon walls groaned as if echoing the tension, and a distant hawk circled the sky, its cries slicing through the morning calm. Maris's fingers tightened around her satchel, her instincts screaming that their path was no longer their own. The silence that Kael had guarded for years was about to be broken, and with it, everything in Maris's life, the safety she had known, the certainty she clung to, and the bonds between her and her sisters was about to be tested in ways she could not yet imagine. Maris's pulse raced as Kael's shadow stretched over the sisters. The canyon seemed to hold its breath, the wind muted as if waiting for the inevitable. Lila fidgeted, her fingers brushing the wild herbs she had collected, oblivious to the silent tension that gripped the landscape. Sage tightened her grip on her satchel strap, glancing between the warrior and her younger sister, trying to weigh their odds. Kael took another step forward, slow and deliberate. The muscles in his arms tensed like coiled springs, yet his movements were fluid, precise. Every inch of him spoke of a life trained to survive in the harshest wilderness. His dark eyes, sharp and piercing, scanned the sisters without a hint of malice. Yet Maris could feel the weight of his gaze pressing down on her chest. "Stay behind me," Maris whispered. Her voice barely audible, but commanding enough to make Lila obey. Sage shot her a quick nod, eyes narrowed with apprehension. The sisters had survived the prairie before, but never like this. This was a predator of the land itself, yet something in Kael's presence felt protective, like an unspoken promise that harm would not come, at least. Not yet. Then a sharp whistle cracked through the canyon, startling the sisters. Dust rose from the ridge above as 3 horsemen emerged, faces obscured by scarves and hats. Guns glinting in the morning sun, rustlers, the same band Maris had feared since leaving the small town of Red Creek. Their intentions were obvious. They had followed the sisters, and now the warriors of the plains would clash with outsiders who had no respect for the land or life. Kael didn't hesitate. With a speed that blurred the eye, he moved to stand between the sisters and the approaching danger. He lowered himself into a crouch, muscles coiling like a panther ready to spring. The dust of the canyon seemed to bow to him, swirling as though anticipating his next move. Maris felt her knees weaken. "We're doomed," she whispered. Lila buried her face into Maris's sleeve, trembling. Sage's eyes, however, were wide but determined. "No," she said firmly. "He's not like anyone else. Look at him." Kael's gaze remained on the rustlers, unwavering, unafraid. In one fluid motion, he drew a short hunting knife from his belt and spun it in his hand, letting the sunlight catch the blade. It was a warning, a promise, a declaration that these sisters were no longer alone. The horseman laughed, mistaking silence for cowardice. But Kael's stance was a living thing, taut and immovable. His long hair whipped in the wind as he advanced a step, bare feet silent on the rocky ground. The rustlers faltered, suddenly aware of the lethal precision in his eyes, the sheer presence of a man who had mastered the unforgiving land. They had only begun to understand. Maris's stomach twisted. She wanted to run, to drag her sisters away, but the canyon walls boxed them in. Kael was their only chance, and as much as fear gripped her, something inside her whispered that he would not fail. A sudden gust of wind carried the scent of sagebrush and dust. Kael pivoted, knife flashing in the morning light, and in a movement too swift to follow, the first rustler's horse bolted in fright, dragging its rider into the rocky terrain. The others hesitated, confusion flickering across their faces as Kael moved like a shadow, his bare arm striking with the precision of a seasoned hunter. Maris's breath caught as the second horseman tumbled, his gun clattering across the stones. Lila clung to her sister, wide-eyed, and Sage felt a strange mix of awe and relief. Kael was more than a warrior. He was a force of nature, a guardian shaped by years of survival and silence, and now, reluctantly, he had chosen to intervene. By the time the dust settled, the rustlers had fled, leaving behind their frightened horses and scattered gear. Kael stood, chest heaving, his long hair clinging to sweat-darkened skin, the morning sun glinting off his tribal jewelry. He turned his gaze to the sisters, and for the first time, he allowed a flicker of softness. Maris stepped forward, hesitant, but with a growing sense of gratitude. "Thank you for saving us." Her voice was shaky but sincere. Kael said nothing, merely inclining his head, eyes still scanning the horizon for unseen dangers. Silence was his language, but his action spoke louder than any words could, and in that moment, Maris understood the truth. Their path had been misled. Yes, but the Apache warrior who lived in silence had entered their lives, and nothing would ever be the same. The canyon seemed to exhale once the dust settled, the echoes of the rustlers' retreat fading like a bad dream. Maris let out a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Lila leaned against a rock, knees shaking. While Sage's eyes never left Kael, her mind racing to comprehend the man who had appeared from nowhere and saved them with such terrifying precision, Kael remained still. Muscles taut even in apparent relaxation, the morning sun illuminating the sheen of sweat on his bare skin. His amber eyes scanned the ridges above, beneath the ledges, across every shadowed crevice. Danger could return at any moment, and he was ready for it. The sisters had learned quickly, in the presence of Kael, silence was more than polite, it was survival. Maris stepped closer, her voice low, tentative. "Who are you? Why help us?" Kael's gaze met hers, unwavering, and then he shifted slightly, motioning toward a narrow ledge that led deeper into the canyon. It was an unspoken command. Follow if you wish to survive. Hesitation rippled through the sisters. Sage gritted her teeth, voice steady despite the tension. "We don't know where we're going. We just got lost." Kael's eyes flicked toward her, assessing. He said nothing, yet Maris felt the weight of his judgment. The canyon held secrets, as did the Apache warrior before them. His silence was not emptiness, it was a language they had yet to understand. Careful, Maris guided her sisters along the narrow trail Kael indicated. The canyon walls towered above them, jagged and imposing, and the wind carried an almost musical whistling, twisting through the rocks like a warning. Every step was precarious. Loose stones shifted beneath their boots, and the occasional hawk's cry reminded them of the vast wilderness surrounding them. As they moved, Lila whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "Who is he? Why does he live out here alone?" Maris glanced at her, a pang of worry crossing her face. "I don't know. But he's not like anyone we've met before." Kael led them to a small overhang, barely noticeable from the main trail, where the sisters could rest. Here, the canyon opened slightly, revealing a hidden pool fed by a trickling spring. The water was crystal clear, reflecting the morning light and Kael's strong silhouette. Sage knelt by the water, cupping it in her hands to drink, while Lila sat trembling beside her. Kael watched them, eyes narrow, calculating. Even in rest, he exuded vigilance. The sisters noticed the scars on his arms and chest, marks of battles they could only imagine. Each line on his body told a story, and they realized that Kael's life had been forged in hardship, solitude, and unspoken tragedy. Maris finally asked, Did something happen to make you leave the towns?" Kael's jaw tightened. He didn't answer immediately, but the faintest flicker of pain crossed his amber eyes. Then, without a word, he drew a small bundle from his satchel, a few dried herbs, neatly wrapped. He handed it to Maris. The gesture was small, almost imperceptible, but it spoke volumes. He cared. He protected. Maris looked at the sisters. Layla's eyes glimmered with curiosity, Sage's with determination. They could feel the unspoken bond forming, a fragile trust between survivor and warrior. It was a trust neither could name, but one that would soon become their lifeline. Suddenly, a rustle echoed from the canyon's edge. Kael tensed immediately, knife ready. Maris froze beside him, heart pounding. A lone coyote emerged, sniffing at the rocks, eyes gleaming. Relief washed over them, but Kael's alertness didn't falter. In this land, even a harmless creature could carry unseen dangers. Maris crouched beside him, whispering, "You've been watching us all this time." Kael's gaze softened just slightly. Perhaps he had been alone, but now he wasn't. Fate had a way of dragging lives together, even in the harshest lands. And for Kael, the lives of these sister strangers brought by a misled path would awaken something long dormant, the possibility of connection, of family, of belonging. The canyon was silent again. But this time the silence felt different. It was not just the absence of sound, it was the cautious calm before a journey that would test courage, loyalty, and the ties that bind. Kael rose, signaling it was time to move. The sisters followed, aware that the desert had already begun to shape them, as much as it had shaped the mysterious warrior who had entered their lives. The sun climbed higher, casting harsh golden light across the canyon walls, and the sisters followed Kael deeper into the labyrinth of rock and sand. Every step brought new shadows, twisting around jagged cliffs, and Maris felt as if the canyon itself was alive, watching them, testing them. The silence Kael carried with him seemed to absorb the wind, the cries of distant birds, even the sisters' whispered conversations. "You've been living out here." "Alone?" Sage asked quietly, trying not to startle him. Kael's amber eyes flicked to her, unreadable, before returning to the canyon path ahead. His jaw tightened ever so slightly. The scars on his arms and chest glinted faintly in the sun, each one a silent story of survival and loss. He didn't answer, not yet. Some things weren't spoken aloud. They were endured, remembered, carried in silence. Maris walked beside her sister, studying Kael's movements. There was a rhythm to him, a careful balance between power and control, each step measured, deliberate. He moved as though the land itself obeyed him, yet his eyes never strayed far from the sisters. Despite his silence, Maris felt the subtle reassurance of his presence. They were not alone anymore, not really. As they wound through a narrow passage, Lila stumbled, catching herself on a rock. Sorry," she muttered, cheeks burning. Kael's gaze dropped briefly to her, sharp but not unkind. Without a word, he extended his hand. Lila took it hesitantly, feeling the rough warmth of his palm. It was a gesture more powerful than any spoken reassurance. Maris couldn't help but notice it. The warrior's silence could speak volumes. Finally, they reached a small plateau overlooking a vast stretch of desert, golden and endless, dotted with mesas and distant cacti. Kael stopped, turning to face them fully for the first time in the day. The wind whipped his long hair across his chest, the feathers and beads in it clinking softly. His amber eyes scanned the horizon, alert, wary. Yet there was something almost human in his stance, something unguarded, if only slightly. Maris swallowed hard. "Why? Do you stay here? Why not go to town?" Kael's gaze softened faintly. He crouched, tracing a line in the sand with his finger, a map perhaps, or a memory. His voice, when it came, was gravelly, almost unused. "The world. It has taken much. I survive where it cannot reach me." Sage frowned, trying to understand. "Taken much? What do you mean?" Kael didn't elaborate. Instead, he rose, motioning for them to continue. The sisters followed, a strange mixture of curiosity and unease twisting in their stomachs. They felt the pull of his story, even if they could not hear it fully. Every scar, every motion, every silent glance spoke of a life shaped by hardship, by loss, by the unforgiving hands of men who could not see him as anything but a myth, a danger dot as they descended the plateau. Maris noticed something glinting beneath a pile of stones, a small weathered leather pouch. She picked it up, opening it carefully. Inside were faded feathers, beads, and a worn piece of cloth embroidered with intricate patterns. Lila leaned over her shoulder. "It looks like it belongs to him," she whispered. Maris nodded slowly. "It's part of his story, part of who he is, and maybe why he's out here." Kael's eyes met hers, sharp and calculating, and then he turned away, continuing down the path. The pouch in Maris's hand felt like a key, small, fragile, but powerful. It was a reminder that the warrior was more than the sum of his scars, more than the silent protector of the canyon. He was a man haunted by a past he could not escape, yet compelled to act when fate demanded it. The canyon narrowed further, walls rising like cliffs of ochre and gold. The sisters huddled closer together, following Kael's lead, trusting him more than they dared admit. They had no idea what lay ahead, perhaps more rustlers. Perhaps something far worse, but Kael's presence was a shield, a promise that they would face it together. For the first time, Maris felt a strange warmth amidst the tension, a flicker of hope. The Apache who had lived in silence for so long had chosen to step into their lives, and the canyon seemed to hum with possibility, danger, and unspoken truths. The sisters' journey was no longer just a walk through the desert, it was the beginning of something much greater, something that would test courage, loyalty, and the fragile threads that bound them to the mysterious warrior who walked beside them. The canyon walls narrowed as Kael led the sisters into a shadowed corridor of jagged rock. Dust swirled around their boots with every step, and the sunlight above barely touched the path beneath them. The air was cooler here, carrying the scent of damp stone and desert sage, and a strange hush fell over the group. Even Lila, normally restless, moved cautiously, her wide eyes darting from the jagged cliffs to Kael's unwavering figure. Maris followed closely, trying to read the warrior's expressions beneath the cascade of his long black hair. There was a rhythm to his movements, almost like a dance with the canyon itself, each step precise, each motion economical. The bare muscles of his arms and chest flexed beneath the sun-darkened skin as he moved, adorned with the tribal jewelry that shimmered faintly in the muted light. He was both predator and protector, and Maris could not decide which was more frightening. They reached a natural alcove, half hidden by shadows, where the canyon seemed to twist impossibly. Kael stopped, scanning the area, then crouched to examine the floor. He traced lines in the sand with his finger, small symbols and marks that Maris could not decipher. His amber eyes narrowed, ears alert to the faintest echo of movement. He had lived here for years, reading the land like a second language, knowing the secrets that no map could reveal. Sage's curiosity overcame her fear. "What is this place?" she whispered. Kael's gaze met hers briefly, unreadable, and then he indicated the alcove with a tilt of his head. The sisters stepped closer, and Maris's heart raced as she noticed a narrow opening behind the rocks, just wide enough for a single person to slip through. Beyond it, the canyon floor dropped sharply, revealing a hidden passage that led deeper into the earth. Water trickled faintly somewhere below, echoing softly against the stone. "This way," Kael said, voice low, rough but commanding. Maris hesitated. It looks dangerous." Kael didn't answer. Instead, he moved first, disappearing into the shadowed opening with the grace of a mountain cat. The sisters exchanged a glance, then followed, one after the other, stepping carefully into the darkness. The air grew cooler and damper as they descended, and the canyon's harsh sunlight faded behind them, replaced by the muted glow of reflected stone. Lila shivered. Why would anyone hide a place like this? She asked. Maris didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were on Kael, following his every movement. "Maybe it's meant to keep people out," she said finally. "Or maybe to hide something important." The passage opened into a small cavern, illuminated by a shaft of sunlight that broke through a crack in the ceiling. Dust motes danced in the golden light, and the faint scent of earth and minerals filled the air. Kael stepped to the center, scanning the cavern carefully, then gestured for the sisters to sit down as they rested. Maris dared a question she had been holding back. "Kael, why did you help us? You've lived here all this time, avoiding everyone. And then you risked yourself for us." Kael's amber eyes softened slightly, and he leaned back against the rock. "Because sometimes fate brings people to your path, and some paths cannot be ignored." His words were few, but heavy with meaning. The sisters sensed there was more behind them: pain, loss, perhaps even guilt, but Kael spoke only enough to guide them, letting the canyon walls hold the rest of his story. Sage glanced around the cavern. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Even hidden, even dangerous. There's something peaceful about it." Kael's eyes flicked to her, unreadable. "Peace is earned, not found," he murmured. Maris watched him closely. The warrior's life was carved from survival and solitude, yet here he was, choosing to guide them through this hidden place. Their journey had begun with fear and uncertainty. But now, beneath the canyon's shadowed walls, Maris felt a strange sense of trust, fragile but undeniable. Above them, the canyon hummed softly with the wind and distant calls of birds. The hidden passage was only the beginning. Somewhere deeper, unknown dangers awaited, and the sisters would need Kael's guidance, courage, and knowledge to survive. And Kael. Perhaps he would find that even a life of silence could be broken by the lives of those who walked beside him. The journey into the canyon's heart had begun, and with it, the secrets, challenges, and truths of Kael's past and the sisters' future would begin to unfold. The hidden passage widened into a small cavern, its walls etched with ancient markings and the faint traces of wind and water over decades. Maris ran her fingers along the stone, feeling the smooth grooves and the subtle warmth left by the sun filtering through a narrow crack above. Lila crouched nearby, wide-eyed, whispering questions about the marks and symbols, while Sage's gaze remained on Kael, as though he held the answer to every unknown danger lurking in the canyon. Kael moved silently to the far edge of the cavern, bare feet brushing the stones with cat-like grace. His long black hair fell over his bronze shoulders, adorned with feathers and beads that jangled faintly with each motion. Tribal jewelry wrapped around his arms and chest caught the dim sunlight, glinting as he crouched to inspect a faint set of footprints in the dust. Maris's stomach tightened. The trail wasn't theirs, it belonged to someone else, and whoever it was had been here recently. Kael didn't speak. He simply gestured for the sisters to follow him further into the cavern. The sisters hesitated for a moment, exchanging nervous glances, but their trust in him outweighed their fear. Each step deeper into the hidden canyon brought a growing awareness. The world outside the walls of stone had lost its grip, but danger still crept silently in unexpected corners. Lila whispered, "Do you think the rustlers came back?" Kael's amber eyes flicked toward her, sharp and calculating. He crouched again, tracing the footprints with his hand. The dust had been disturbed too recently. Someone had moved through the canyon, silent, patient, watching. It was a predator's signature, and Kael's instincts flared. His bare muscles tensed beneath his skin as he prepared, yet he remained composed. Maris swallowed hard, feeling both awe and fear. "We should turn back," she murmured. "Maybe we shouldn't be here." Kael didn't reply. Instead, he led them through a narrow crevice that opened into a sunlit chamber, the canyon floor spreading out below them in a breathtaking vista of golden rock, distant mesas, and scattered cacti. The wind carried with it the faint smell of smoke from somewhere far beyond the canyon, a hint that other humans were near, and not all of them friendly. Sage stepped closer to Kael. "Why? Do they keep coming?" she asked softly. "Why can't we just be left alone?" Kael's gaze swept the horizon, amber eyes alert. The world does not forgive, and some paths are never free of danger, he said finally. His voice was low, measured, each word deliberate. The sisters felt the weight behind it. He had lived this truth every day for years, surviving attacks, betrayal, and loss in the harsh expanse of the desert. Maris noticed a subtle shift in Kael's stance. His muscles coiled like a spring, eyes narrowing as if sensing movement even where none existed. Then, without warning, a shadow flickered across the far rocks, a lone figure, cloaked in dust, observing them from a distance. Lila gasped, stepping back toward Maris, while Sage instinctively reached for the small knife at her belt. Kael moved in front of them, shielding the sisters with his body. His amber eyes locked onto the shadowed figure. Bare, muscular arms flexed, ready to strike, but his movements remained controlled, precise. The tribal jewelry on his arms and chest glinted faintly, reflecting the sunlight as he prepared to confront whatever threat was approaching. The figure stepped closer, and Maris could finally see it was a man, ragged and tense, eyes darting nervously between them and the canyon behind. Kael's gaze never wavered. He didn't speak, didn't flinch. Every muscle in his body communicated a single message: do not underestimate me, or you will not leave this place alive. The man raised his hand slightly, a mix of fear and desperation in his expression. Kael's jaw tightened. He didn't lower his stance, didn't relax. His silence was louder than any words. In the seconds that stretched, the sisters realized that Kael's past the battles, the pain, the years of living in solitude had honed him into a force the desert itself feared. Maris gripped Lila's hand tightly. Sage's eyes never left Kael, and as the wind swept through the canyon, carrying the scent of sagebrush, dust, and distant danger, the sisters knew one undeniable truth. The journey was no longer just survival. They were part of something bigger, something shaped by Kael's silent strength and the relentless challenges of the desert. The canyon hummed around them, alive with unseen eyes and whispered threats. And Kael, the Apache who had lived in silence for so long, stood unyielding, a protector, a warrior, and the anchor the sisters would need to survive what lay ahead. The wind swept through the canyon with a whisper that seemed almost alive, carrying the scent of dust, sagebrush, and distant fires. Kael led the sisters along a narrow path that climbed toward a hidden ridge, muscles taut, bare chest glinting with sweat and tribal jewelry. His amber eyes scanned every shadow, every crack, as if the canyon itself had become his weapon. The sisters followed silently, hearts pounding in their chests, each step echoing the tension that had gripped them since the first encounter. Maris stole a glance at Kael. The warrior's long black hair clung to his shoulders, and the faint clink of beads and feathers reminded her that, despite his formidable presence, there was a deep humanity hidden within the silent protector. He had saved them from rustlers, guided them through hidden passages, and confronted unseen dangers. Now standing at the threshold of the canyon's heart, he seemed more myth than man, untouchable, yet undeniably real. Suddenly, movement flickered from the ridge above. Kael froze, muscles coiling, and the sisters instinctively crouched behind him. A group of riders emerged, dusty and wary, their eyes scanning the canyon with suspicion. Maris felt a chill. These were not random travelers, they were scouts, likely searching for whoever had been moving in the canyon. Following the faint trail of footprints Kael had detected days earlier, Kael stepped forward, his bare feet firm on the rock, and raised his hand in a subtle, commanding gesture. The riders hesitated, recognizing the presence of someone they could not challenge. Kael's amber eyes held theirs, unwavering, and in the momentary silence, the canyon seemed to bow to him. The sisters could see it, Every line of his body, every motion, spoke of power earned through survival and solitude, of a man whose life had been forged in danger and silence. Maris took a deep breath. "Kael, who are they?" "They follow danger." "Or seek it," he replied softly, voice rough but steady. "We move carefully." The sisters followed him as he led them along a narrow ledge that wrapped around the canyon wall, eventually bringing them to a hidden alcove overlooking a broad expanse of desert. Below, the riders had stopped, scanning, frustrated, unable to find the passage. Kael's presence had turned the canyon into a fortress, a labyrinth only he could navigate with such deadly precision. Sage whispered, "It's incredible." "How you know all this?" Kael's jaw tightened. "The land teaches you if you listen. It speaks in wind, stone, and shadow. You must respect it, or it will take everything from you." The sisters absorbed the weight of his words, realizing that Kael's silence was not emptiness, it was knowledge, wisdom earned through years of hardship. And now, that knowledge had become their lifeline. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the canyon, Maris realized something profound. Kael had become more than a protector. He had become a guide, a presence that steadied them, anchored them, and gave them courage they didn't know they possessed. The canyon, once a place of fear and uncertainty, had transformed into a space of possibility. Shaped by Kael's strength and the sisters' trust, Lila leaned against Maris. "Do you think we'll be safe now?" Kael's amber eyes softened slightly. "Safe is a word the world rarely grants. But together, we endure. Together, we survive." Maris nodded, a quiet determination rising within her. The journey had begun with fear and uncertainty. Yet through danger, trust, and Kael's silent strength, they had discovered resilience, courage, and the unspoken bonds that now tied their fates together. As the first stars appeared in the vast desert sky, Kael led them back along the hidden paths, the sisters following with newfound confidence. The canyon seemed to breathe around them, alive with the stories of survival and the whispers of a past that had shaped the Apache warrior into the man who now walked beside them. In that moment, Maris understood a truth that had been quietly forming since their first encounter. The misled path that had dragged the sisters into Kael's life was no accident. It was fate, weaving together lives that were meant to intersect, to test, and ultimately to forge bonds that neither danger nor time could sever. Kael paused on a ridge, amber eyes scanning the horizon one last time before turning to the sisters. A faint nod was all he gave, but it spoke volumes. Protection, guidance, and trust unspoken, yet clear. The canyon stretched before them, vast and untamed, yet for the first time the sisters felt hope. They were not alone. They had Kael, and together they would face whatever came next.